Ever wondered how much of the Gaza conflict has roots in biblical prophecies? You might be surprised. The roots of interpretation, particularly about the Gaza conflict, often get entangled with biblical prophecies. But let's embark on a journey to untangle these threads and get back to the garden, quite literally. In the Western world, interpretations of biblical texts often stray from the priestly, prophetic, and apostolic views rooted in the Garden of Eden narrative. This deviation is a primary source of confusion and misunderstanding. It's crucial to understand that the New Covenant is not a new story, but rather the continuation and fulfillment of the Eden storyline. In the beginning, God breathed the garden into man, making him the carrier of its nature. This divine act meant that man could reproduce the garden anywhere he went, with the physical earth being peripheral to what was carried within him. However, a pivotal decision by man to establish himself led to a significant change in his source of strength, consequently redefining his identity and nature. His nature became a desert, creating a separate species, distinct from the original garden carriers. But here's the twist. God's promises to Abraham were twofold. They were physically aimed at the fractured species of Adam and spiritually towards the future species of Christ. Moses then leads this covenanted species to a physical promised land, compensating for their inability to carry the garden within. Understanding the Eden narrative therefore becomes key to appreciating the significance of the New Covenant. It's a story of man's journey from carrying the garden within to losing it, and finally, having the garden restored within him. This narrative underscores the importance of interpretation and understanding the roots of biblical prophecies in the context of modern conflicts. God breathed the garden into man, making him a carrier of its nature. This divine act elevated man to a unique status, a living paradise, capable of nurturing and spreading the garden's essence, irrespective of his physical location. The earth, in all its beauty and grandeur, was merely a stage for this grand spectacle, a canvas for man to paint his Eden wherever he went. But this idyllic reality was not to last. A pivotal decision, a moment of profound significance, set the course for a radical transformation. This decision was not just a mere choice. It was a defining moment that changed the very source of man's strength and altered his identity. An identity that was once intertwined with the garden's verdant nature now began to resemble a barren desert. The decision to rely on his intellect and strength, rather than the divine wisdom that once guided him, led man down a path of self-reliance and self-centeredness. This shift in perspective marked the birth of a new species, a species that carried not the lush greenery of the garden, but the arid harshness of the desert within. This desert species, a stark contrast to the original garden species, lived in a constant state of scarcity, constantly striving for survival, and ever fearful of loss. This was a far cry from the abundance and serenity that characterized the garden species. This transformation was not just about a change of scenery from a garden to a desert. It was about a fundamental change in man's nature, a shift from abundance to scarcity, from trust to fear, from unity to separation. A significant shift occurred, creating a separate species with a desert nature. This new species, driven by fear and self-interest, would go on to shape the course of history in ways that the original garden species could never have imagined. God's promises to Abraham were twofold. The physical promise was extended to Abraham's offspring, the fractured species of Adam, while the spiritual promise was to the future species of Christ. This distinction is vital in understanding the concept of the promised land. The physical promise was the land of Canaan, a territory stretching from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. This was an earthly paradise, a land flowing with milk and honey. Yet it was a temporary solution, a compensation for mankind's lost ability to reproduce the Garden of Eden within themselves. Moses, chosen to lead the Israelites, the covenanted species of Adam, became the conduit for this physical promise. He guided them out of the land of Egypt, through the harsh wilderness, and towards their promised land. This journey, though fraught with trials and tribulations, was a testament to the faithfulness of God's promise. Yet, the physical territory was just one aspect of the promise to Abraham. The spiritual promise was of greater significance. It was a promise of a future species, the species of Christ, who would have the ability to carry the garden within, to recreate the paradise lost, not bound by geographical limitations. This spiritual promise was not limited to a physical location, but was a promise of a restored relationship with God, a return to the original design where mankind carried the Garden of Eden within them. It was a promise of a new nature, a new identity, and a new way of being. The physical promised land was a compensation for their inability to carry the garden within. But it was just a placeholder, a symbol of the greater promise that was to come. The promise of the New Jerusalem, the promise of a new species of man, capable of carrying the garden within, irrespective of physical boundaries or territories. So let's remember, when we talk about the promised land, we're discussing not just a physical territory, but a spiritual reality, a promise of a renewed relationship with God, a promise of a restored identity, and a promise of a new way of being. Enter Christ, the spiritual seed. In the grand narrative of creation and covenant, Christ emerges as the game changer. He is the one who comes in and redefines man's nature, making a profound shift from the desert of Adam's fall to the lush garden of divine promise. Christ, as the spiritual seed, is the perfect embodiment of the garden within man. He is the one who puts to death the fractured species of Adam and breathes life into a new species. This new species carries within it the garden, not as a geographical entity, but as the very essence of its being. This is where the concept of the New Jerusalem comes into play. The New Jerusalem is not a physical territory, but a spiritual reality. It is the state of being where the Garden of Eden is no longer a distant memory, but a present reality, deeply rooted within the heart of man. The New Jerusalem is the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. It is the realization that the blessings of Abraham, once tied to a physical location, are now experienced as the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit within the new species of man. The significance of the New Jerusalem is profound. It eliminates the need for a specific physical territory. It signifies that man can now exist anywhere and reproduce the garden independently. It's an invitation to a new way of living, where man's nature is no longer defined by the physical boundaries, but by the spiritual reality that dwells within. In this new reality, man's nature is now Jerusalem. He carries within him the divine promise, the divine presence, and the divine purpose. He is the living, breathing manifestation of the New Jerusalem, the city of God that has come down from heaven to dwell among men. Man's nature is now Jerusalem. It's a powerful statement, a profound truth, and a transformative reality. It's a call to live out the divine garden within us, irrespective of the physical boundaries that surround us. It's a call to live as the New Jerusalem, the city of God, here and now. So what's the connection between the conflict in Gaza and biblical prophecy? I hear you ask. The answer is quite simple. There is none. The turmoil we witness today in Gaza is a complex issue rooted in political, socio-economic, and historical factors, and not tied to the prophecies of the Bible. To understand this, we must delve deeper into the narrative of the Bible, where the focus is not on physical territories, but on the restoration of the garden within man. The garden we speak of is not a physical place, but rather it symbolizes the spiritual state of man, a state of harmony and divine connection. This garden was lost when man chose to rely on his own strength and wisdom, leading to a fall from grace and a shift in his nature. This shift, in essence, created a separate species, one that was spiritually fractured and disconnected from the divine. The promises given to Abraham were meant to address this fracture. They were twofold, physical and spiritual. The physical promise was the land, a compensation for man's inability to carry the garden within. The spiritual promise, however, was the coming of Christ, the spiritual seed that would restore the garden within man. With the arrival of Christ, the garden was restored within man, creating a new Jerusalem. This spiritual city eliminated the need for a physical territory, as man could now exist anywhere and reproduce the garden independently. The blessings promised to Abraham were no longer tied to a physical location, but were manifested through the Holy Spirit within the new man. Hence, the conflict in Gaza, like any other territorial dispute, is a result of human actions and decisions, and not a fulfillment of a biblical prophecy. It's essential to understand that the Bible speaks of a deeper narrative, man's journey from a state of spiritual fracture to a state of spiritual wholeness, irrespective of physical boundaries. Remember, it's not about physical territories, but about the restoration of the garden within man. The real focus should be on fostering this restored garden, a place of peace and harmony in ourselves and in our world.